Hello, my name is Seamus and welcome to the Entrepreneur Retreats YouTube channel. This is the third video in a series of 4 videos I did from a conversation I had with Peter Taylor. And I've split that conversation into 4 videos. Like I mentioned, this is the third video. If you want to go back and watch the other 2, you can if you want. Or if you're a rebel and you want to start with number 3, then by all means, watch ahead. I hope you enjoy. Just on the idea of, your faith and the area that you kind of work in, a lot of people would say that science and faith, they conflict with one another. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that is a real common belief that's out there. Yeah, that somehow science and faith in God, or science and religion, even in general, cannot live side by side. That these two things are irreconcilable.
Yeah.
Of course, nobody really says in what sense. Nobody really says very specifically what exactly are the contradictions. It's just some kind of pervasive feeling that people have that these two things must be irreconcilable. And the conversation always reminds me of this interview I watched on TV one time between the comedian John Bishop. I don't know if you know him. He's a Woodleyan comedian, and James Corden, the actor and TV host. They were having a conversation, and Corden is from a Christian background. Actually, his parents ran a Christian bookstore, and John Bishop was asking him about his Christian upbringing, and his response was really bizarre. But I always kind of felt it's kind of the pervasive feeling in particularly in Western culture. He kind of said. He said something like, "Yeah, I've always had a hunch that there must be something out there, but at the end of the day, you can't argue with science."
Mm-hmm.
And it gives no hint at how exactly science is at odds with this hunch he has that God exists. It's just kind of this blanket claim. And one of the reasons it's really strange to me is that the very foundations of science were laid by committed Christians.
Big time, yeah.
Right, when you think about it, like some of these names, Sir Francis Bacon, Johannes Kepler, Isaac Newton, the great Irish scientist Robert Boyle, Michael Faraday, Lord Kelvin, James Clerk Maxwell, like these were all committed Christians and made some of the most important contributions to science, and they saw no contradictions between science and their Christian faith. And I mean, of course they didn't. Like when you think about what science is, like what is science? It's a set of methods. The fancy word is it's a set of epistemological methods, but it's a set of methods, right, to try to understand the natural world. That's what it is, the set of methods to try to understand the natural world. So it has actually very little to do with questions of faith.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely very little. Like, in other words, science is asking how something works, and faith is usually asking why it works. The fancy way theologians often or apologists often say this is that science is concerned with mechanism, faith is concerned with agency. That's the fancy way of saying science is asking how, faith is asking why. It's a little bit like, to give you an analogy, it's a little bit like asking, asking whether it's science or faith that explains reality. Is a little bit like asking whether it was Michelangelo, the artist, or his chisels that carved out his famous statue of David. In other words, faith is concerned with the agency, the artist, like the person and why he made it, why he actually carved out with the statue. And science is concerned with the mechanistic details, like the actual techniques and the tools that were used. And that's the kind of distinction. So there's really no conflict whatsoever. In my mind, maybe to give you another example, let's say I make my wife a cup of tea. There's 2 explanations we can give for the making of that cup of tea, right? We can give a mechanistic explanation, which would have to do with the actual mechanism of making tea, like the increase of the kinetic energy of the molecules of water as the kettle boils, right? The other explanation is a relational one, an agency one. It's, I made my wife a cup of tea as an act of kindness to my wife. They're both answering completely different questions. They're both true, and neither are contradictory. Yeah.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. Very good.
So one is mechanism and one is agency. And you can ask the same thing, of course, about the big kinds of theological questions. Like you can apply the same principle to the creation of the universe, for example.
Yes.
Like the biblical account is concerned with the agency, like who made it and why, what was the purpose.
Yeah.
Science is concerned with the mechanism, the laws of nature. What are the laws that govern the actual evolution of the universe? So they're asking two completely different questions.
So has anything you've learned, especially in regards to what was it again? Theoretical
physics, yeah.
Yeah. So so has anything you've learned, even with theoretical physics, has it actually made your faith stronger? Anything you've learned?
Yeah. I mean, I would say everything I've learned about every subject, in a certain sense, has made my faith stronger, right? Because I mean, I think the author of all truth is God. So everything that I learn, every piece of information I learn, it usually stirs in me an awe, like a holy awe. So I'd say everything I've ever learned has really stirred my faith, if I'm being honest. But let me rephrase the question a little bit. Is there anything I've learned in theoretical physics that might offer positive evidence in a creator God? So there's a slightly different way of asking the question, and the answer to that I would say is yes. Wow. So let me give you a couple of quick examples. So the first example I would invoke is the fact that the current evidence, the current cosmological evidence. So cosmology is the study of the large scale evolution of the universe. So it's basically the study of the universe on the largest scales. So the current cosmological evidence supports the idea that the universe has a beginning. And that beginning is what cosmologists call the Big Bang, right? Now, the philosophical or the religious implications of a universe having a beginning are profoundly important. And the reason is there's a metaphysical axiom that says that everything that begins to exist must have a cause. Everything that begins to exist must have a cause. Now, if you think about that statement for a second, if that statement was false, then things could pop into existence without any cause, right? I mean, an elephant can pop into the room where you are right now without any cause whatsoever. €1 million could pop into existence under your pillow as you sleep tonight.
A bank account, maybe.
Yeah, or your bank account. Yeah, you wouldn't mind that. Yeah. But we all know it's not true, right? We all know that everything that begins to exist must have a cause. To deny that would be to be more superstitious than any religious faith, right? I mean, it just has to be true. And you can't prove it to be true because it's so fundamentally true, right? That's why it's called an axiom. Now, if the universe has a beginning and everything that begins to exist must have a cause, then the universe must have a cause. Like there actually must be a cause to the beginning of the universe. And that cause is what Christians call God. Right? And that's really important. Now, some people might argue, yeah, but then who made God? Aren't you just kicking the can down the road? You have to also answer the question, who made God? And the fact is that you don't. The metaphysical axiom is everything that begins to exist must have a God. Things that are past eternal have no logical need for a causal explanation. So, and that's really important because up until I think it was about this up until the 60s, when people really established the evidence for the universe having a beginning, most people believed that the universe existed forever, that it didn't have a beginning. And because it didn't have a beginning, it didn't actually need a causal explanation. So that was strongly in support of an atheistic worldview. But then all of a sudden in the 60s, we had this evidence, and this was the radiation left over from the Big Bang that people discovered in the 1960s by, it was two American scientists called Penzias and Wilson, and they won the Nobel Prize for this discovery. And from that point on, the strongest evidence supported that the universe had a beginning. And of course, all of the Christians went, aha, that's evidence for our worldview. And in fact, everybody back in those days, back in the 60s, even all of the newspaper articles that were writing about this scientific discovery, they all knew that this was strong evidence for the Christian worldview. And in fact, that it strongly went against an atheistic worldview. But somehow, and I don't know how, but somehow in the intervening years, the general public and also many Christians have come to believe that the Big Bang was evidence against God.
Yeah.
I don't know what I genuinely don't know exactly how that came to be. I don't know how that confusion happened, because back when that scientific discovery actually happened in the 60s, everybody understood that this was strongly in support of the Christian worldview, because this is basically saying that the universe had a beginning and that needs a cause.
And the Big Bang theory itself was put forward by a Christian as well, wasn't it?
It was Lemaitre, yeah. It was a
yes.
priest Lemaitre, yeah. That's right. So, so yeah, I don't exactly understand how that confusion happened, but I would say that's one piece of evidence that strongly suggests the Christian worldview. The second piece of evidence I would invoke that strongly invokes the Christian worldview would be is a piece of evidence that's sometimes called a fine-tuning argument.
Yes.
That's this idea that all of the constants of nature appear to be very, very finely tuned for life to exist. I mean, the numbers are so ridiculous. But I'll give you one example. This is the example of the cosmological constant. So the cosmological constant basically provides an outward pressure that causes the accelerated expansion of the universe. So if the cosmological constant was a little bit larger, the universe would be expanding way too quick for galaxies and structure to have formed. So we wouldn't have galaxies, we wouldn't have planets, etc. Like no structure would have formed in our universe. If the cosmological constant was even a little bit smaller, then the universe would have already collapsed under its own weight. So the actual number itself that scientists estimate is that the cosmological constant seems to be fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the power of 122. An absolute remarkable fine-tuning.
Yeah.
So that's you're way more likely to win the lotto for several weeks in a row than you are to find the universe with that particular value of the cosmological constant by chance.
And that's just one number. It needs there's a few more numbers as well that need to be exactly where they are. And they're just like prayer as well.
There's about 30 other numbers, and some of them are even more fine-tuned than a cosmological constant. So to me, that's positive evidence that this universe is not random. It is divinely balanced on an incomprehensibly thin razor edge.
See, I love the way you're talking there, because you're learning things about, you're learning things that, like you said, that other Christians, would like refute. They'd hear the Big Bang theory and it'd be like, oh no, but you're like, the more you're learning about the universe around you, the more you're like, this has to be God. Like God has to be in this. And I'm really into history, but I feel the same way about that as well, and that's what I really love, is like when you have this relationship, this friendship with God, I feel like God is highlighting these things to you. And again, the way you're talking is, you've such a passion. It's like, we're talking about purpose as well as like, you're in this job because God wants to have a conversation with you through your job, which I think is really cool. Guys, that was the third video in the series, and the final video will be out shortly. Thanks again for watching.